On today's show, we'll be talking about spirits, skinwalkers, moving objects, and much more. All coming up on this episode of Paranormal Mysteries. Welcome to the show, and thank you all for joining me. I am your host, Nick Ryan. I hope that everyone's had a great week, and before we start, I'd like to say thank you to all of you for supporting the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please remember to subscribe, share, and review the podcast. This supports us by helping new listeners to discover the show. And if you'd like to support us even further by becoming a patron or by donating, please visit us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries or at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. These links and others can be found in the show notes. And if you've encountered the paranormal and would like to share your story, please email me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com. All experiences, no matter how big or small, are always welcome. And with that in mind, today's listener story comes to us from Leniko. Leniko says, "Hi Nick, it's 4:44 a.m. my time, and I just finished listening to the last story about skinwalkers, and I am writing you out of sheer excitement. Yet I must also admit, I am a night owl. This, of course, being a direct result of a lifetime of otherworldly harassment, but I digress. When I saw the title, I immediately sensed this was in reaction to the story I had submitted, and I knew it was time to listen in. I can't even explain to you the joy I had that someone else had such a terrifying experience. I say this jokingly, but what an ironic, wonderful, and horrible blessing that people around the world can connect over such ghastly experiences. What I truly mean to say is that lovely Diana has given my heart a gift in that I finally managed to share a story publicly and someone could connect to it. Not only that she believed me, but we connected over a similar experience, and yet have never met. I have not shared any of my hundreds of experiences publicly due to fear of ridicule and non-believers. This show is truly a gift, so thank you, Nick, for allowing us to have a form of paranormal therapy. I will send any protective psychic energy that I can to Diana, and if it makes her feel any better, I did not suffer any consequences in real life or otherwise after sharing. With that being said, I would like to submit another offering to the podcast with your approval. This is another long one, as I am incapable of doing otherwise. If your listeners recall from the last time I wrote in, I lived in a fairly modern house at the time, built in 1988. Ironically, the house I suffer the most paranormal activity in. I feel this is due to my psychic abilities growing stronger and location to the creek that drew the native spirits. We had moved into this house in about 1994. We stayed here until my parents filed for divorce in 2001 and began the process of making arrangements to sell the house and move out. This took about a year. My dad moved out in 2001, and my mom had moved out earlier in 2002, while I remained in the house to finish school and began looking for an apartment with my best friend, Kari. Poor Kari, as you recall, the constant victim by proxy to my experiences. But fortunately, the demise of today's tales involves the father of my nephews, whom we shall call Mike. My sister, who was about 8 years older than me, was staying in the house with her toddler, newborn baby, and Mike before they moved into an apartment across the creek. There were many periods during this time where I lived alone in this house, which was a real treat, and if you recall, I wasn't very vocal about telling my family about these experiences. We had had every entity imaginable, save for Bigfoot coming here. Perhaps even he made a guest visit, unbeknownst to me. I had just been to Kari's house to stay the night before, and had returned home. I went to the kitchen to get a snack, and found myself going straight to my parents' old bedroom, which contained the pink rotary phone to call Kari minutes upon arriving home. I actually can't remember why I called her back so quickly after I was just at her house. I know it wasn't anything important, but perhaps it was something I forgot to tell her earlier. The whole call took only about 2 minutes or so before I got off. Remember, I was just downstairs and nobody else was home. My sister, Mike, and the kids were all in Denver for the day, having a family outing. If you remember from my last story, she had driven through the smoke-like, dog-shaped apparition when pulling into the cul-de-sac months before, when when my mom was still living there. My sister and Mike had purchased a tiny 4-cylinder blue hatchback vehicle that Mike named the Roller Skate, due to the fact that this vehicle was so small he could probably wear it like a roller skate. This was the car she drove when driving into the Smoky Dog figure. They had taken the trusty roller skate to Denver for their family day, and let me preface this with the fact that this thing could barely push 90 miles per hour. So back to the story. I went downstairs about 2 minutes later to find the kitchen in an entire disarray. The patio door in the living room was now open, a big red flag, but as usual, I didn't panic. I already knew that this was paranormal, and I was calm. I walked into the kitchen and saw that every single drawer and cabinet had been flung open. Now, I had already seen The Sixth Sense many times at this point. I resonated with that movie on a molecular level when I saw it as a child. I was already recalling the scene with the angry wife ghost who kept flinging cabinets open. I looked around shocked, but also in some demented way, I was getting that adrenaline rush I had become so addicted to from a lifetime of experiences. I continued to look around and saw that the door that goes to the garage was open, and this is when it started to become a bit more unnerving. As I walked into the garage, Mike's stereo was in there. The stereo was suddenly blaring at max volume on a rock station, and as I looked toward the side garage door, it was also flung open. This door had a deadbolt lock and regular lock on it, and was always locked. I didn't sense that this was a person, but I knew that if I didn't say something and it ended up being a human burglar, I would need to explain all this. So I calmly called my sister from the kitchen phone. She, however, was not so calm. She is a very logical person, and quickly proceeded to tell Mike that someone was in our house with me alone. She wanted to call the police, but I insisted that even if it was a person, that they were not there any longer, and may have just run out of the garage. I admit I found myself smiling, because I secretly enjoyed that they were going to find out that this was not a human, and well, I have a morbid sense of humor, if anyone hasn't figured that out by now. Denver is about an hour and a half from where I live, possibly longer with traffic, but they were there in 30 minutes. I will remind you that they were in the roller skate that was meant for mild inner-city commutes, not Autobahn-level speeds. They were terrified that I was going to be murdered. When they arrived, they found that there was nothing missing, and there was no perpetrator. I explained to them like I had earlier, that this happened within minutes, and I did not hear a sound, not even the stereo blaring. I did not hear a single sound. As much as a ruckus as this scene was, you would have thought that someone had stormed the house in a rage. What I find so eerie is the level of energy these beings must have had to be able to unlock all these heavy doors, turn stereos on, open cabinets, and pull drawers out. It's not always easy for spirits to perform such physical tasks. I had insisted that if this was a robbery, Mike had plenty of expensive tools in the garage, and yet nothing was taken. He was more or less an atheist at the time, and prided himself on being hyper-logical. I loved seeing how unsettled he looked, and my joy in his discomfort would only grow with time. Don't worry, he loves playing insane pranks on people in real life, the kind that makes this all totally justifiable. And things only go downhill from here, I assure you. Now me, being the reasonable psychic that I am, I was accustomed to all of this. He, however, was not. As you may recall, I realized that some of this activity was due to Skinwalkers, but I didn't know this at the time. Now, one bit of information that I didn't have time to include in the last story, I am going to add now. During the time period in my last story, that was about 1998 to 1999, is when my sister met Mike, the father of my 2 nephews. They were young and had just had my first nephew and needed some help getting started, as they were both very young parents. I had fallen asleep in the finished basement, but no TV was left on. I was too tired to go back upstairs, which is unheard of because that basement made me extremely uneasy because of the closet that led to a crawl space that had very bad vibes. Suddenly, Mike came tearing down the basement stairs in a panic, asking if I was okay, to which I said, "Yeah, why?" He said that he could hear what sounded like an animal growling from the basement all the way upstairs. This is normal. Well, the ghastly noises, no, but our heater vents were the kind of pipes you see on pirate ships, where you can listen or talk to people in other rooms, even from the 3rd floor where they were sleeping. I said I didn't hear anything, but to keep him calm, I said it was probably nothing. He didn't seem so sure, as his eyes instantly went to the TV to see that it wasn't even on. He explained it sounded like a menacing growl that was pacing in the basement. For some reason, again, I wasn't scared, and just continued to sleep down there, as I didn't feel that I was in danger. A lot of my experiences are more cryptic in retrospect, and my abilities weren't quite as fine-tuned yet, so I didn't even know what a lot of it was. So back to the current story. I had just finished high school and was enjoying the summer vacation, or what was left of my childhood, before moving into my first apartment with Kari, in a few months, whenever the house sold. But for now, everyone could enjoy staying here in the meantime. I had a friend named Jackie that had gone to the same high school as Kari, who came to hang out. Jackie and her friends had stolen the art class mannequin from the 50s that they named Mr. Torso, and he had become a local icon, as people would pass him around and take photos with him, and then send it all back to Jackie. You also had to put a new hat or wig on him for the photo. That was the rule. She brought Mr. Torso over that evening while Mike worked on mountain bikes in the garage. I had a disposable camera that we were going to use to take pictures of Mr. Torso. Mike had left his wallet, keys, and mountain bike helmet on the kitchen counter, which will be important and hilarious in just a few moments. We had been playing around outside and realized it was getting dark soon, so we needed to take the pictures with Mr. Torso before it got too late. Keep in mind, we had been in the front yard the entire night, and Mike knew this. We went into the garage and he snapped some photos of all of us with Mr. Torso before walking into the kitchen. He then came running out, saying that all of his belongings were gone. He asked us if we had touched them, but he already knew that we hadn't because we were in the front yard and in his sight the entire time. It was now dark, and unfortunately the only available flashlight was the tiny one attached to his keys. He then decided to set out, looking for it outside, as if somehow he knew that the items were out there. The entity had removed every last item from his wallet and strewn them about the gigantic backyard that also happened to be a big hill. When he finally managed to find the keychain with the mini flashlight with a dying battery, he found each ID and credit card placed in different locations across the entire yard. When he finally came back inside, he had a defeated, annoyed yet secretly scared look on his face. He knew that it was physically impossible for it to have been us, and that we would have never done so in the first place, and nobody else was home. He was just silent and unsettled for the rest of the night, and didn't want to talk about it. There was simply no explanation, and I offered that it was indeed the spirits that I had been warning him about over the years. Perhaps it was because of his reactions that I smiled when I called my sister during the kitchen incident. Any time something paranormal happened at this house, he would smugly retort with such confidence that it was such and such, only for it to be disproved, usually within minutes. I do thank the spirits for that, actually. I feel as though these spirits enjoyed picking on him in this regard, as my parents were always blissfully unaware of any of these events. It was also around this same period of time that Mike had another delightful event. My dad had bought me a mini stereo for getting good grades a few years back, which I had kept. Now I am not going to get into specifics of what these entities could be, as it may have been the Skinwalkers, but it also may have been another set of entities that I will not delve into at this time, but listeners may derive what they are by insinuation. My stereo began talking in another language. It was a very garbled language, with a strange resonance that did not sound human, and I had heard these voices during several episodes of sleep paralysis over the years. Now, this was a new development, as far as the stereo voices. It wasn't frightening to me. I wondered if it was just EVPs, as I had experimented with a small cassette player years before, and had heard a few weird sounds. Mike then busts into my room, to which I explained what was going on. Now, when you explain something to him, he stands there with his arms crossed, with a furrowed brow, and a look of concentration as he analyzes every detail of your story so that he can fire back with a rational explanation. This was not going to be the case today, nor was it ever the case when it involved these matters. He said, "It's just signals from a plane or helicopter." I then said, "That's interesting," as I yanked the power cord out of the wall and the power went off, and yet the garbled talking continued. I looked with glee at his face after ripping the cord out and saw his arms were still crossed, but his eyes had grown wide and concerned, and his brows had lifted quite high. At this point, there was no explanation. And for those of you wondering how I knew this would happen, it is because I had been moving the stereo around to various outlets as a test, as well as unplugged it to find that my stereo was still talking. So, when I had performed this task, I was already confident of what the outcome was going to be. I admit, I loved pulling the cord out dramatically for maximum effect to see his expression. I mean, if nobody was ever going to believe my stories, seeing their reactions was going to provide entertainment and validation. I had to make light of these events somehow, but not everything was funny. On a more serious note, I did feel harassed at times, and it became too much as I felt alone and scared. There were certain visitors that in fact did scare me despite my constant bragging of not being scared. I definitely had felt mortal fear several times in my life. As I said before, we had moved into this house around 1994. My sister was a rambunctious teen. At one point, when she had first met Mike, they ran off for months with no word to California and Las Vegas. When she got back, she had shown me some expensive makeup items she had got at luxury stores in Las Vegas, and I remembered that all of these items went missing very shortly after. I always sensed that a young woman ghost had taken a specific interest in my sister and her belongings. She never received the full-on otherworldly harassment that I endured, but at one point she did mention an incident where she was washing her face in the basement bathroom, and she felt an ice-cold hand on her shoulder while her eyes were closed from soap. My mom has rather cold hands from circulation, so my sister began calling out for my mom, who could actually hear my sister downstairs calling for her. So I always wondered if a female ghost had taken her makeup items. Back to current time of this story of 2002, the house had finally sold, and we were all moving out. I need to mention that this incident with Mike and his belongings was during this phase as well, which lasted a few months while paperwork was finalized on the house. When we were finally moving the very last of our stuff out, it was as though the spirits were making their final attempts to get our attention. I knew this was part of why they did what they did to Mike, but the message became loud and clear in the very last days when someone had to venture into the crawlspace to clear out all the old photo albums and such, and I decided I wanted to go through all the old memories. I was back and forth between taking boxes out and upstairs when a very peculiar incident happened within seconds. I had taken some items out of the crawlspace, through the small closet hall, and out into the basement living room. When I went back in seconds later, what I found shocked me. All of the makeup that had disappeared from my sister's adventures in Vegas was sitting in a pile on the edge of the crawlspace opening. It was in a ratted nest of dust and debris, so it looked like an actual bird's nest. There were her luxury rainbow blush pearls in the fancy jar, and her Revlon Toast of New York lipstick and lip liner, which I will never forget to this day, among other bits and bobs mixed in the debris. I have to say that for as many paranormal incidents that I have seen, this one hit so hard. Who had taken it and why? And where on earth had they put it all these years? When I showed my sister, she was in utter shock, but at the same time, she immediately knew that it was the female spirit that I called Gloria, who would knock on the wall below her room at times, and who grabbed her shoulder while she was washing her face years ago. This trend of disappearing and reappearing items was something that was not to end, as when Kari and I moved into our apartment, the new adventures were just about to start. But for now, I will end the story there, with many more to come. Thank you for sharing, and as always, please take care. Thank you also to Diana for having the courage to speak up and bring more light to the world. P.S. Mike is no longer an atheist, but apparently has become extremely religious and rather paranoid about these sort of events. Lenico. As we come to the end of tonight's episode, I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in and supporting the show. And a special thank you goes out to Lenico for sharing their experiences with all of us. If you've witnessed something that you can't explain, please contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. All of our contact information can be found in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a safe and healthy weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday with our next episode. From all of us at Paranormal Mysteries, thank you so much for listening, and please remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.